Welcome back to the channel. This week we will be reviewing R.F. Kuhn's Dragon Republic. If you guys are new to the channel and you missed my last book review, I will leave a link to it up in the cards. While you're down there, if you have any book recommendations you want me to do reviews on in the future, do not be afraid to leave those down in the comments. As always, format for the book review, summary of the story, pros, cons, and then my final thought and ranking. So this week I have a new intro, as you'll see in a second. If you guys like it, please give your feedback down in the comments. So with all that out of the way, let's hit the intro. So our story begins with Rin and the rest of the Cike on the run, acting as mercenary pirates after the events of the first book and Rin's fateful decision that ended that story. One day, on a mission for their pirate queen, Rin and the rest of the Cike are confronted with the possibility of them joining Nez's father's rebellion against the Empress. Rin and the Cike decide to ultimately join the rebellion against the Empress, where Rin has to A, start to learn to control her phoenix powers because they're going to use her as a weapon, and 2, combat the sort of mental hold that Altan has on her. I'm not going to spoil anything, but it's a really important part of her story. And she also has to combat her addiction to opium while she's doing all of this. But not all is as it seems with the rebellion. As Rin continues through the story, she starts learning a lot about the past. She learns a lot about Nez's past, a lot about the Trifecta's past, and a lot about why this rebellion started in the first place. So, Rin must make a choice. Does she leave the rebellion or stay? Starting off the pros section here, we finally got a lot more of the Cike. When I did my original copy war review, I had the lack of the Cike being in the con section, and I ultimately thought that that wasn't a good idea, and it really didn't deserve to be there. Con finally fixed that problem and gave us a lot of development on their powers, but also the characters in the Cike itself. So as the story's going on, Rin's really getting attached to the Cike, which I really appreciate. I love when there's a group and all their group dynamics really work. In the first book, my con section was gonna be about how they weren't really in the story a whole lot, but we finally fixed that and the group is really just come together. Pro number 2 here is we finally fixed the pacing from the first book. If you watched my Poppy War review, you remember that I put the pacing of that book as a con. We don't have that problem here. The pacing really flows well. It makes sense. We're not stuck on something that's really unimportant, and we're not rushing through stuff that I really find interesting. It finally strikes a great balance between getting through the story and letting us absorb all the information that it's giving us. Pro number 3 is our main protagonist, Rin. Once again, Rin takes the top spot as far as character development. So I loved how in the first book we saw Rin as the young girl who is wanting to get out of her village and become someone. We see that girl make a fateful decision at the end of that book. But in this book, we see her deal with the ramifications of doing that decision and also joining the rebellion against the Empress. And in the beginning of the book, she's really naive. Once again, she's like, yeah, I want to help overthrow the Empress for all that she'd done. There's a lot that gets revealed in the first book, so I'm not going to spoil any of that. But she is driven to right the wrongs that the Empress has done. But as she continues on, she realizes that this rebellion isn't squeaky clean, as she just experiences a lot of hatred for being the mouthpiece for the rebellion. And the rebellion, as with anything like this, has more or less just become an occupying force. And Rin's gotta come to the realization, like, do I stay and support this? Or do I go and try my hand at doing something better? And the battle between the two halves of her is really compelling. Taking the number 4 spot, we have Neza. Neza is actually not a new character. We had met him in book 1, but he's not entirely relevant until this book and the relationship him and Rin develop throughout the entire story. His character development comes in two main ways. One, his backstory, which is incredible and explains a lot of why he was the way he was in book 1. Like I said, I'm not going to spoil anything in case you do want to read it, but the stuff we do learn about him explains a lot of what he did in book 1. Development number 2 is also the fact that he is the son of the person leading this rebellion. So he's like, I have to honor my father and help with this revolution, but he's also seeing all of this destruction and carnage that the rebellion's causing as it's continuing to build and build. So he's really torn between, do I stay with my father or do I help Rin, the regular people, and try and put an end to all this? So really quick here, I'm gonna sidetrack to a theory I have, and spoilers if this ends up being right for the next book. But from what we see of Neza throughout the book and towards the end of the book, I think he's gonna end up helping Rin out and abandoning his father's revolution and helping Rin with whatever she ends up deciding to do. For pro number 5, we have the continued use of real-world religions and real-world countries as anecdotes for countries within this series. Like I said in my Poppy War review, I loved how R.F. Khan used real-world cultures and real-world religions as bases for this series. And I feel like the cultures she does bring in aren't really represented a whole lot in stories, and I really feel like this is a great opportunity to bring a lot of really unknown cultures into the spotlight with a series like this. And I am really grateful that I actually read this series, because I am always willing to read something that will expand my mind to new cultures. So taking the number 1 spot for our con section is the whole big reveal at the end of the second book. Again, for spoiler reasons, I'm not going to tell you what it is. All I'm going to say is if you've read stories like these before, you really know where this is going. You can see it from a mile away. It's not that that type of twist isn't bad, but I'm kind of like, when I got to the twist, I'm like, okay, this makes sense. This is probably the most predictable thing that would have ended up happening. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's a bit predictable to end this book on. Coming to the final thoughts and ranking here, again, I really highly recommend the sequel to Poppy War, Dragon Republic. It continues what I personally love, the Dragon War. It just stacks on top and it makes the series even better. And I will continue to read this series as the next book in this series, Burning God, is coming out pretty soon. I'm going to give Dragon Republic a 9 out of 10. If you've read this book before, I would love to read your reviews on it. But please, for the sake of anyone who hasn't read this book, please keep them spoiler free. That's all I'm asking. Feel free to discuss the book in the comments. Just please leave it spoiler free. Down in the comments, if you guys have any books you want me to do reviews on in the future, don't be afraid to leave those down there. Also, if you guys know more books or book series that are like this, please do not be afraid to drop those down there as well. Next week, we will be reviewing Kingdom Keepers Book 6, Dark Passage. Till then, have a great week, and don't forget, keep on reading.